Hey there! Specifically, hello to anybody who has a business card. If you've found here and you're subscribed, feel free to hand out that business card to somebody else because nothing beats promotion like word of mouth. So today is Sunday, so it's going to be a religious talk again because, it's the holy day and all that. So I'm going to talk about a topic that a lot of people like not talking about unless they're uber conservative, in which case they like flinging it in the face of people like me. We're going to talk about God's wrath. Specifically, God's wrath in the Old Testament, but God's wrath. So to start, we have to define wrath, and there's this really cool website called gotquestions.org, which talks all about a lot of biblical concepts, and I get a lot of information from there. It's a fairly reliable source. It's kind of biased in a lot of ways, and I don't like a lot of what it says, but everything is biased to some degree. Like, these videos are biased based on my personal perceptions and my personality and the information I have access to and things of that nature. So this website says wrath is defined as the emotional response to perceived wrong and injustice. And that's a really interesting definition. It further says that wrath is translated frequently as anger, indignation, vexation, and irritation. And each of those has a slightly different connotation, but I like what it says. The emotional response to perceived wrong and injustice, because it's not the emotional response to wrong and injustice. It's the emotional response to what we think is wrong and unjust. And there can be a huge difference, and I think that's why God is allowed to have wrath and we are not. In fact, it's one of the 7 deadly sins, and if you're Catholic, well, those sins are pretty big, and if you're not, they're like sins. So, this idea then means we have to figure out what is right and what is just. And the only being who really knows what rightness and justice are is God, because he created those concepts. Not only is he right and just, not only is he righteous and just, but he is right or righteousness incarnate, and he is justice incarnate. He is these things. He didn't just make them, and he's not just reflections of them. He is them. So because he is them, and because he has a perfect understanding of them, his perception of wrong and injustice lines up with what actually is wrong and unjust. And then there's us. First of all, strike number 1. We're created and we're finite. Because we are created and did not create, we have a more limited understanding than the Creator. And because we're finite, we have a limited understanding. We don't get it. Strike number 2, we live in a broken world. We live in a world damaged by sin, and that means we are damaged by sin. Ergo, our perceptions are damaged by sin. And that's really hard to wrestle with, because a lot of times when I see something going on, I have this visceral reaction that says this is wrong. I assume it is wrong. Because, I think it is. And so I have to realize that it's my perception that it's wrong, which does not necessarily mean it is wrong. My perception, my gut feeling, my visceral reaction says that, it's wrong for Tea Party people to post stupid comments on the internet. But obviously that's not justice in the eyes of the law, and I wouldn't really want it to be, but that's my gut reaction. And so if we take that to a whole nother level, our gut reaction towards wrath in general is often inaccurate and not really even what we want. Rule number 3, we're just not in control. It's just not our place. There's something on my screen. There we go. It's gone. It's just not our job to be filled with wrath. We are called to seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God, yes. But it is not our job to define what is just and what is unjust. And it is not our job to get really super emotionally invested, I suppose. Like, we're supposed to get emotionally invested in the lives of victims, and we're supposed to help and whatever. But this whole wrath thing is best left to the big guy in the sky. So that's what wrath is. And nobody really likes talking about wrath anymore, because wrath implies that there is wrongness and injustice. What is unjustness? Injustice. And in our society, we live in a postmodern society. Modernism is this idea where all truth is relative and nothing is actually true, which is ironic because the statement all truth is relative is not a relative truth, it is an absolute truth. So it's either the exception that proves the rule or the flaw in your logic, depending on how you look at it. And I personally think it's the flaw in the logic, which is weird because I usually apply the exception that proves every rule. Anyway. So this whole truth is relative thing still lingers in postmodernism, which is where we are currently, even though postmodernism is sort of questioning it and it's sort of getting at the spirituality of things, like yoga, meditation, whatever. We are trying as a society to connect with our spiritual side without being like religious, because religion, no absolute truth. But we seem to think at large that there is more than just the physics of the world. There's something metaphysical going on. So people don't like talking about wrath because it implies there's an objective sense of wrongness and injustice, and everybody is trying to live with their own truth and say all truth is relative. You can't say anything is really wrong. Even though we get upset about things like school shootings. Like, I am the first to admit I felt incredible wrath when I found out about the one in Oregon. Even though I mostly felt disappointment that this problem is still ongoing. In 2015. Like, we've had more school shootings in these 10 months than we did in the entirety of last year. And I can't help but wonder if the next school is going to be one of my friends or mine. Anyway, to God's wrath we go. So we don't like talking about it, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it, because the Bible talks about it. So this whole wrath thing is mainly prominent in the Old Testament. Surprise, surprise, because God, people perceive God as a lot more judgmental back then. But it's just God's plan hadn't come to fruition to the same degree that it does in the New Testament. So, the wrath of God in the Old Testament is a divine response to human sin and disobedience. It's frequently associated with idolatry, and this site has some examples, which are in Psalm 78, 56 through 66. And this idea of idolatry is not just about external idols, it's also about the idol of ourselves. So it's like this idea where disobedience is really idolatry, because you are worshiping yourself above God and saying, no, my truth is better than God's truth. And that's found in Deuteronomy 1:26 through 46, Joshua 7:1, and Psalm 2:1 through 6. There's this cool concept called the Day of Wrath, which is found in Zephaniah 1:14 through 15. And the Old Testament writers like to talk about this. So this idea then, one day God is going to come and unleash his wrath and judge people. And in the New Testament, we know that that is like the second coming and all of that stuff. But it's really cool that was something talked about even in the Old Testament. I don't know. I just really like it when things line up like that. But that's not the only place where wrath is talked about, like the Old Testament. That's not the only place in the New Testament, I mean, like Revelation. It's elsewhere. It's in Luke 16:19 through 31, John 3:36, Romans 5:6 through 11, Romans 2:5 through 6. Because, like, sin is still an issue in the New Testament. God is a God of wrath who judges sin. Like, that doesn't change. And all sinners are subject to his wrath. The only difference here is we have another option. We have two options in the Old Testament. Option number 1, like, face God's wrath. Option number 2, obey. In the New Testament, we have a third option, believe in Jesus Christ, who did not incur any wrath in his life, but took on all of God's wrath in his dyingness into death. Dyingness, I guess, is the state you're in while you're dying, because you're still alive, but it's different from, like, his life. It's specifically while he's dying. So, Romans 5:6 through 11 says, gotta get my quotes right. John 3:36 says, whoever believes in the Son has eternal life, but whoever rejects the Son will not see life, for God's wrath remains on him. So it's not this idea that belief in Jesus, makes us somehow unworthy of God's wrath. It doesn't, like, magically make us perfect. It's that Jesus sort of blocks, like, this might get weird, and all analogies break down eventually. I'm not being sacrilegious, I'm making a point. It's like God sort of blocks the Father's vision of our wrathful things by stepping in front of us. He has incurred the wrath for us, and then God's like, well, the wrath's being distributed. Guess we're all good. Which is weird because it doesn't sound very just, but then again, mercy really isn't justice, it's mercy. So I'm not gonna complain, I'm really not, because, like, I don't want to go to hell. So, like I was talking about earlier, people aren't supposed to have wrath. And that's supported by Romans 12:19, Ephesians 4:26, Colossians 3:8 through 10, 2 Corinthians 5:17. Yeah. Because it's just not really our place. Because the world would be a much less... the world would be a worse place if I was in charge of deciding what is unjust than if God is. Because I'm not perfect and he is. And this video is long enough. Like, go find this thing. Google wrath for yourself. This is just like a crash course. Like you should know, I teach myself this stuff at pretty much 5 minutes before I'm shooting up to while I'm shooting. If you see me looking over there, it's because I'm looking at this website. I'm super prepared. Whoa. And if you like this video, or are fascinated by the topic of God's wrath, or are pleased to see somebody finally talking about it, or agree with my comment about Tea Party people, like this video. If you want to talk about it, leave a comment. And if you want to see more of my beautiful face, or if you want to, avoid my wrath, if I know you in person, oh wait, I can't distribute wrath, because I'm not perfect. Anyway, feel free to subscribe. And if you want to leave a question for our Just Asking Monday, which who knows when that'll be, the last Monday in October, send it to either my Twitter or Tumblr, or use the hashtag AskAzaria, and both the Twitter and Tumblr are below. I hope you have a great day.